Hey, hello, this is Sean from the podcast Thrive, Not Survive After Child Abuse, right? Yesterday, my episode, that was episode 37, this is episode 38, I explained a little bit stronger why actually this podcast came into existence and what is the purpose of this podcast. And I'm reaching out to all the child abuse survivors out there and want to give them hopefully some suggestions and tips or just share things and hopefully they relate to that so that we can start together a movement to bring that number of child abuse victims down and ideally of course to zero. And I think we should strive for that, even if it's maybe impossible. Who knows, right? But if you don't try it, then then it will never finish. Now, me myself, for a long time when I was a child abuse, well, I'm still am, of course. When I was thinking about these things, actually, I didn't want to know anything about child abuse anymore at all. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to hear about it. I recognized that, by the way, also in one of my siblings. When you started to talk about his past in this thing, he just became angry, mad, wanted to throw at stuff, and my way of dealing with stuff has always been talking through it and maybe even overthinking about it. I made a little slip there, but yeah, thinking about it, definitely not avoiding it. There was a period that I did that. I want to avoid it. I want to escape from it. I think that is good too. I don't think you have to rip open all the wounds but carefully. You have to sometimes go back to that place that stopped you. You have to go back to the place that stopped you in life and then take yourself from that moment on, bring yourself to where you are today and then move on. Does that make sense? So that's what you need to do. As if you go in a little time machine and it's like a rubber band. It's like the rubber band, you gave it to yourself when you were young and you start walking on that path of life, but that rubber band is connecting to that younger child that you had, and it's going to stretch, and hopefully that rubber band has enough stretch that you can do, but the walking becomes harder and harder until it completely snaps. So sometimes you have to go back to that point, pick up that little child, bring it with you all the way. And I'm saying this because I didn't even notice it, but when I started to talk about this, I always started to talk about this in the third person. If it was not me, I always talked about Jean the boy or the little boy that happened to that. And I noticed that with a lot of child abuse victims to do that, and that's why I came to this. I also wrote about it in my book, and I wanted to do that. So years ago, and that's probably about 12 years ago, when I finally decided to see a therapist around this, a psychologist. She became a friend, co-author, all that kind of stuff. But it took me a really long time to do that because I always believed, and that's a little bit how I was raised. You solve your own problems, you work through it. I'm strong. I'm not weak. I can work through it. But I noticed that something was wrong on me. Me and my family, we just moved to the United States. I almost everything that I wanted from life. At least that's what I thought. I had a great career. I had a great wife. I had two incredible children, and so we were setting our life up here in the United States. We had a huge house, two cars, everything that from at least the Dutch perspective or where I was coming from, I think, oh man, I made it. And strange as that is, at that moment when everything was going so well, something in me started to stir up and I just literally couldn't handle it anymore. I had to go to someone for professional help. It's actually my business coach. I think I talked about that a while ago too. It was actually my business coach, and she's a clinical psychologist too. And she noticed things in me. She said, "Sean, you're just a little bit off." I'm incredibly good to keep a mask on, right? It's close to Halloween, so it fits. And in the COVID-19, I was always good to keep a mask on, right? I was always really good at that, pretending that everything was good and stuff like that. And it wasn't, right? It wasn't. So even after all these years, and that's just actually, if you think about it, very recent, 12 years ago that I started to do that. Now, I didn't know it then, but when I started to go to therapy, I knew that I did a lot of inner work well, and it was not just it just happened to be that way, right? It just happened to be the way. I was already in the process of thinking of writing a book. I could use that a little bit also as a healing part and stuff like that. And I found a wonderful person who helped me through my own things, but also give me direction in the writing of the book Broken Silence. One of the things that she asked me to do was actually to write a letter to my perpetrator, my uncle. I'm going to read that letter to you just to show you how deep that goes into a child's memory and how long and far that rubber band can be stretched, but at some point in time you have to release that. So I'm going to read that. It's in my book Broken Silence, and my uncle's name is Roy. He passed away already at that moment, and this is probably in 2008 or something when I wrote that letter. I have to look it up to find the date. But in my book, it's undated. So, letter to Roy. Roy, I've never called you uncle. You were always Roy to me. It was hot. It was a hot summer day and I was visiting my aunt, your sister. I cannot recall whether my parents were visiting my aunt too. I only know that my brother was there. You asked me to go upstairs with you to play and to wrestle a little. I remember that I was reluctant to go with you, as if I already knew what your intentions were. Going upstairs to one of the bedrooms, you closed the curtain and urged me to come to bed to lay beside you. I can still feel the taste, how you touch me with your hands and your lips, and how and where you made me touch you. This was the first time that it happened, and it's still the strongest recollection of many of these events. One or many, it feels like a blur or a dark place to go to. From that day on, I have this strong feeling of guilt, the feeling that I've done something so wrong that I felt ashamed thinking about it, and even more ashamed to talk about it to anyone, including my parents, for many years. In fact, I've never told my parents. You actually gave me 5 Dutch guilders, a lot of money for a 7-year-old boy 40 years ago, if I promised to keep it our secret. What was driving you? Did you have no clue how wrong this was, even as a boy? I knew this instinctively. I felt dirty from that moment on. I developed an unusual interest in sex, maybe even an obsession. What bugs me the most is that you put a trigger down inside me, a trigger that when pulled could make me feel angry or intensely sad or at unexpected times. Seeing a television show, hearing or reading a story could do the trick. It's always there and I never know when it might hit me. But when it does, I cry and break down. It was only when I met my current wife, and this was 12 years ago, so my wife at the time, I also found that you hurt something in me on an even deeper level. I sometimes hate it when she touches me or does something when we are intimate. It's not always the same. Oh no, that would be too fair. It always surprised me, and it surprises my wife. If it happens, I push her away and want to be left alone. I sometimes yell at her that I don't need anyone, so you didn't only affect my life, but you also affect others. Through reading, I learned that people who have been abused are more likely to abuse others. I'm still afraid that you have created a hidden monster in me, evil that comes out when I least expect it. With all this, you have changed the trust I have in people, and although I try to live with trusting others, I don't trust anyone around my kids, or maybe I still don't trust anyone around me. Deep down, I still believe that I'm on my own, that I have to do everything by myself. I'm angry for what you have done to me. I'm angry because I didn't stop you from doing this to others. I'm sad that I can't talk to my parents about my deepest secrets. I'm not going to blame you for who I am or what I do today. That would be too much credit for you. I forgave you after I learned that hate doesn't bring me anything. But I still ask myself how you could brand a little kid for the rest of his life for just a few moments of your own filthy needs and pleasures. Jean. Okay, so this was my letter. It's literally a copy of that letter that I had to write, or there was an exercise of my therapist to do that. It was liberating in a way because I said things that later on also, became a stronger account in my book. I'm not sure if you should do that immediately if you're a child abuse victim, to immediately do that, because this happened, under guidance, of course. I also did the reverse. I had to pretend that I was Roy, and I would write a message to me, right? Does that make sense? So it's like a correspondence. So I'll read that to you too, and I will talk a little bit more about it, right? Letter to Jean. Jean, I'm only talking to you from the other side of life. I have no excuses for what I've done, and mostly if it was like an external force took over to make me do things I did. This now sounds like a lame excuse, and I know it was wrong, but couldn't stop it. I should have found help for my problem, but I didn't. There has never been a moment that I actually thought about the consequences of my actions, the outcomes of my victims. I know how wrong it was, but again, never contemplated, not even for a moment, what the long-term impact was of my deeds for a young kid like you. If I were a sane person, I would have probably stopped conducting these activities, but I let my urges be the leader of my actions, fully selfish without any responsibilities. The only fear I had was that I would be caught, but even knowing what the repercussions could be didn't make me stop. Mostly I was playing on the guilt feeling of my playmates. No one blew the horn, so I could safely go on doing what I was doing. I have no remorse of anything I did, while at the same time I didn't want anything bad happen to you. I did not deserve your forgiveness, but knowing that you do forgive me makes me feel guilty after all. Roy. Now, I've no clue, to be honest, if he would really write that, right? That's just at the time when I did that, I had that feeling about him. It doesn't make me feel any better. I had to go through, think about it, like why I wrote it that way. Maybe that's how he would thought, and maybe not at all. Maybe he was just a total jerk, and maybe he had no feelings about this at all. I don't know. We cannot talk to people to the other side. Some people believe that they can, and some people actually believe that I can. But in this case, trust me, I have no need to talk to this person. But one day, after all the abuse, we literally lost touch of him, and my mother sometimes talked about him because it was the younger brother of my mother. She talked about it sometimes. They did not had a good relationship, so he was outside our family life. So all in all, there was no way that I would meet him, and at most of the times we forgot about it. But one day, my grandmother, his mother, she passed away, and he came to her funeral, and at the wake, he was there, and I was going with my sister because we knew that he would be there, and she said to me, "Can you go with me together? Because I have no idea how I would react to see Roy again." And at that time, it was only my sister and me who literally knew what was going on about the abuse. So think about that, right? So we went there to the funeral. He saw me. I mean, I walked in first. It was a little room. The body of my grandmother was there, so it was right beside her coffin, and he walked immediately up to me, and he had this surprised face, like like happy to see me, like it was, and he was always like that. I remember that. It was like happy to see me, and he gave me a hand. I gave him a hand. I said condolences for your mother, and I said to him, I felt so strong and proud, by the way. I said, Roy, I'm not here for you, clearly, right? I could care less, but your grandmother, my grandmother is your mother, and out of respect for her, I'm here. That's the only thing. That's the only thing I have to say to you. And I felt so strong, guys, to do that, to do that, and it helped my sister a little bit. She trembled. She couldn't shake his hand. I don't know why I did that, right? I just wanted to let him know that he didn't get me at all, right? So I felt strong, and he pretended there was nothing going on, and maybe I hoped there was something like that. So it threw me off a little bit. To be honest, because of that event in that wake, that's a little bit besides the story, but maybe you'll like it. Later on, I broke in the mortuarium, and just to see my grandmother by herself. So I sat in the middle of the night. It was a little bit spooky because there were also other rooms, and I hope I would go to the right place right where my grandmother was, and I broke in to be alone with her for a little bit, and then years and years later, that's now 10 years ago, by the way, when my own brother passed away, my brother Herman. My other brother Edwin and I did the same thing. We just couldn't stand that there were so many people around him all the time, and we just wanted to be. Was in the same place. We just wanted to be alone for a few minutes with him. Sorry, guys, that had nothing to do with the story that I was telling, but it triggered me a little bit because. It feels very unnatural to lose your brother so young, to be honest, right? But yeah, that's it, guys. That's being a child abuse victim. It doesn't make you different than other people. If you wanna read about that and hear about that, go back to my podcast number 10. I wrote a poet about that. We don't want to be different, but there are things that are different in us. No matter how long I denied it, no matter how long I try to say, nothing can hold me back, and nothing will help me back, will hold me back. But we have to deal with certain things. And you need to deal with them, right? You don't literally, in my honest opinion, don't always have to go to a therapist, right? And I'm not, I'm not breaking a lance here for my own work, but literally, if you pick up my book, it will bring you forward, at least for a piece. And maybe it's a combination of, it's not either or, right? But you have to do something. Most of the abuse victims, they just sit on it by themselves because we think we're alone, and then we think we cannot do anything about it, which is a form of fatalism, right? And then we have the shame, because we don't want to tell anyone, and then we have the guilt because we think maybe it happened because we caused it, right? Don't deal with these things alone. It helps to talk to other victims. It definitely helps to talk to someone that you can trust. But the hardest thing is to see that if you don't do that, you actually cut the people that you love and live close to you. You cut them short too. So it's not only for yourself. It's definitely also for your children, for the people that you love, that you need to deal with this. And if you have listened to my podcast yesterday and you go with me a little bit in that story too, you would release more than your own stuff out, right? You will create something more positive. You will be capable of doing positive things in life much better than you do right now. That's a great thing, right? That's a great thing to do. So go there, do that, right? Like I said, I read it to you to just give you an insight how I was thinking at that time. Hopefully it helped you too, and it hopefully stimulates you to come forward, if only to a very small circle around you. Send me a message if you can, if you have some reaction at jean@jeandorf.com. That's my email address where you can always reach me. Do that. I will always do that. I will always react to you like that. This was episode 38. Tomorrow we'll be back. We're close to number 40. Isn't that exciting? Yes? Okay. Tomorrow it's Halloween too. So maybe have a special Halloween podcast. All right? This was Jean from the podcast Thrive, Not Survive After Child Abuse. Okay. Bye-bye.